So if you can maybe in like, 30 seconds introduce yourself and then like maybe say like, what's your role in actually governance or on-chain governance? Like, are you like researcher, are you delegate, are you, practitioner? What like kind of like is your role towards the governance? So let's start with Michelle.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Mashal. In terms of on-chain governance, I'd say, so I had partnerships for Bankless DAO's publishing side, Bankless Publishing, so I'd say I vote on stuff. And then in terms of the research side, work with a few different DAOs on figuring out what works and doesn't. That was part of the grants research.
Nice. Disha?
Hi folks, I'm Josh, computer scientist and mathematician at Oxford. I also help run an organization called Metagov, which does a lot of research and builds standards and infrastructure for a lot of different online communities, but definitely including DAOs and Web3. I don't, well, I don't actually vote on anything, thank God. I do advise a few programs and ecosystems, like Cosmos, Juno, Cardano, a couple of DAOs. More on kind of like for the research purposes.
Okay. Maybe, can I have a question right away? Like, why you don't vote?
Generally speaking, like voting requires a lot of, it's like you need to have relatively high context in a particular ecosystem, right? Generally speaking, like that's done by, I mean, there's lots of different ways people do it. My organization, Metagov, because it's a nonprofit, we try not to be, and because we work with a lot of different DAOs and ecosystems, we try not to be too partial for any one. So it's like if I'm voting and I have like tokens in a particular ecosystem, like how can I be neutral with respect to other ecosystems? You actually find this a lot. Like you have like validators or you have delegates that vote in related ecosystems that might be competitors. Like maybe you're like a major position in like Uniswap, right? But then you're like also a delegate for some Uniswap competitor. Like what is the ethics of that?
Yeah.
We just try to avoid that.
Yeah, like we heard that like conflict of interest is happening a lot in crypto, so it's good that you are trying to avoid it. Joe, what about you? Like, what's your role in governance? Who you are first?
Yeah, I'm Disruption Joe on the Twitters, and I've been in the crypto space full time since 2017. I started in Chicago, built up a meetup group there, about 4,000 members, and ran a conference, had a partnership, public-private partnership group. Eventually found a spot at Gitcoin during COVID. I was pretty early on the team there with Consensus, spun out to Gitcoin Holdings, which then we launched the DAO. I was the first one to leave. And with Gitcoin, I ran the grants operations for a few rounds. And then when we spun out the DAO, I led our fraud defense work stream, catching Sybils. And then in April, we wound that down because the protocol's there. It's not a public good service anymore. You should pay for it for your community. And I started Plurality Labs, which has a $3.5 million grant, ARB grant from Arbitrum to develop capture-resistant grants governance.
Nice, thank you.
I do vote sometimes.
We do?
Both Gitcoin and Arbitrum. Yeah.
Okay, good. I like when people vote because like we deal with voter apathy a lot, so if someone votes,
it doesn't matter much.
Just like
I'm not big.
Two out of 3 votes, so we could hear. So question to person who doesn't vote.
How is that the characterization?
I don't know, it's just like, seems like
People as a neutral person.
people will
Like now
recognize it by
known as the non-voter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the label, like I don't vote.
But for good.
Please don't vote for good.
Yeah, because we are here like talk about like on-chain governance, but I don't think like we actually said what on-chain governance is. Like, and I think we will be actually as a kind of neutral party, researcher. You will be maybe the best like to explain like what is actually on-chain governance.
Oh, okay. What
so
is
maybe if someone even doesn't know what is blockchain, let's try it this way.
Okay. How many people don't know what a blockchain is here?
Okay.
All right, if you're really embarrassed, it's okay, don't worry. I think there's a kid on an iPad at the back, so he should have his mechanics raised. So, on-chain governance, actually a couple of different things, but let's say like in the context of DAOs, it's just, there's a smart contract, it defines the rules for engagement, like voting, maybe like either with tokens, NFTs. There's also sometimes there's like access control rights, administrative rights. You know, like there's a time lock, and sometimes even without voting, somebody just has the ability to, cut a proposal or delay it. This is all part of on-chain governance. These are usually sometimes complicated series of contracts and code embedded in what we call DAO frameworks or DAO governance frameworks, right? There's a range of these frameworks that kind of say this is how voting or governance should happen. So you're maybe familiar with governor. I think this is like, Tally is running of the show, and Tally does a lot of work with the governor contracts, right? So that defines a certain kind of on-chain governance. Of course, there's also the on-chain governance that's embedded in the blockchain layer, and that's a form of on-chain governance. Let's say different layers, different blockchains have different levels of on-chain governance. Sometimes it's just the infrastructure. Sometimes there's actually voting and representation and some form of delegation embedded in the sort of the operations of the blockchain. But it kind of depends.
Okay. Yeah, let's maybe follow up on that, levels of on-chain governance, because like there might be, like different wide, let's say, or like how much on-chain to be. And Joe, maybe that's a good question for you, because you've been around for some time, you've been at Bitcoin or whatever, but like maybe you get a big one or describe.
Once or twice.
Describe like what's the levels? What's the levels
Right.
kind of on-chain governance, like in Arbitrum or Gitcoin or something?
Like, to me, one of the amazing things that I got into space for was this idea that nation states back fiat currency with violence at some level. It always ends up coming down to that, and Bitcoin kind of backs it with math, the value that it holds. And so that's on-chain, right? Like that's something that happens through this protocol process. And to me, the on-chain governance is the things that happen where you can argue all day, hey, that person has a conflict of interest or whatever, but whatever is allowed to happen on-chain is that level of governance. So there's another conversation about the social aspects of governance, which would not be on-chain when somebody says, hey, you shouldn't be allowed to vote for this because you have a conflict of interest. To me, that is the part of governance that's not on-chain. To some people, that means that it's not valid. I think it's a little more complex than that, but when you talk about on-chain governance, it's what the contracts will actually enforce. And I do think it's good to keep your governance of your DAO as close to that as possible, because like soft power can sit in the space in between, what's going to happen on-chain and wherever you set all these weird policies that now are no longer enforced by math, but have to be enforced through what?
People?
This is actually a really fun conversation we had a while back at this conference a couple months ago on DAOs. And we were talking about violence, actually. It's actually exactly about state violence. Like, how do states control us? Because they monopolize violence. I mean, there are judges, and there are courts, and like other kinds of rules, but at the end of the day, there's some people with guns who are to come to your home and take you away if you don't follow those rules, right? And there is a kind of violence, actually, in blockchain. We just think of it, we don't usually think of it like this, but it's like forking. Forking of state is basically what violence is in the state.
Right.
Like blockchains are capable of forking, or we are capable of forking, so we can do damage to the state and to all that infrastructure, just like states can back up their threats with violence.
It's an exit right, right? Like technically enforced chain. So like, how many people do you know that said like, I'm gonna move to Canada if Trump's elected? And then they didn't because like everything else in their life is connected there, right? So like, your rights in any democracy to have like an informed consent are your right to a voice, right? You get to vote and have a voice on things. and your right to exit if you don't like that. But right now, everything, all your values are bundled into something where you got to vote for like one of like two people, you know, or whatever. But like DAOs are very interesting because you can actually hold value, like based on what your values are. So we're on the brink of like redetermining value, like where it's based on your values, you hold stake in something because it's meaningful to you, and then the rules are enforced that, you know, programmatically make that money.
It's interesting what you're saying, just in terms of technically there aren't conflicts of interest on chain, but I feel like there's still so much messiness that does happen because there are conflicts of interest that are off chain but still happen. And I don't think there's a lot of transparency even around figuring out what, what's the easiest way to say it? Yeah, like one of the findings in our research was like there's a bunch of projects who have review committees and councils, or just folks who are reviewing these grants, right? Who have projects that are also grantees, but they're also on the review side, or are heading these grants programs, and not just in one ecosystem. There are people that are in 5 different ecosystems getting grants from 5 different programs, and it makes no sense. And the fact that, and I don't want to name people out because I just don't want to do that.
Are they here?
Come on, let's get spicy in here.
No, but
Who wants spicy?
Name that violence.
I choose peace today. But it's
Choose
unfair.
peace, don't vote.
But it's unfair, and I don't know, I hope we can solve this, hopefully through some form of collaboration on chain. I don't know what can be done, but it just feels like there's a lot that needs to be said. This is like the basic premise of any, let's not compare it to Web2, but at the same time, you can be on a review side and still be getting a grant, or be associated to companies that you're advising, and there's so much of back funneling and almost like Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones, whatever, or, you know, game of governance, if you want to call it that happens, and it's just unfortunate.
So what I hear, maybe I can like reply back, like it's basically that like we have the on-chain governance, but it's like very little actually like happening there, and way more still happening in the kind of like social consensus, which is basically off-chain, and there are still like a lot of problems till we actually get to the execution, which is happening on-chain. But we are creating so many like, you know, decisions already before, and it's just kind of like solidify there, but the decision been made already. Like that's not like the decision was made on chain, the decision was just like executed on chain. There is one project like, you know, that's probably well known, like MakerDAO, who is actually now like doing the endgame plan. And one of the reasons there is like that, like everything should be like rule-based. So I don't know if you are familiar, but like basically what they want to do using AI, that's the first time we are saying AI here, to like create all the rules for any possible thing that can happen, that there is actually a rule that can be followed. So there will be like thousands and thousands of rules basically created.
Or one. This is our rule for what we do when we don't have a rule.
Yeah, but like they want to basically do like make rule for everything. Like what do you think about this kind of like, let's say, almost like extreme on-chain governance, that like basically everything will be kind of followed by some rule that is like kind of like encoded in the governance? Like maybe I will start with Josh.
Will be.
So I think for what Maker wants to do, so Joe was talking about math earlier, right? I would say that math does not yet exist to do what Maker wants to do. That you can't formalize the world in a set of, at the very least, human interpretable rules. That even using things like LLMs does not get you there. And that this is, I mean, I'm not saying what they're going to try to do is not interesting, but I don't think it's, I think we need different infrastructure that doesn't exist yet to make it work like in the way they want it.
Makes sense. Joe, from practical perspective, like you are now building the governance for Arbiter, like, you know, is that something like you might consider like have like every rule basically what can ever happen, like, or what's like kind of your approach to make the governance, on-chain governance works better?
I mean, I'd love to get it there, and we're running a lot of experiments in doing that. You know, I figure, you know, a lot of grants programs kind of fuck up, and nobody really cares. So if we just give a bunch of entrepreneurs building on-chain tools the funds to get iterative design improvements on on-chain mechanisms, they'll at least do as well as most grants programs are doing now. Maybe we'll find a cool mechanism too. So it's kind of two birds with one stone approach that we're taking. I think the idea that we've all forgotten in DAOs is that Bitcoin and Ethereum work really well as DAOs, and they had an issuance of a token at a consistent rate, which is very important, I think. And they also had open and permissionless validation of a rule set, which enabled a new behavior. So like in Bitcoin, you know, the validations are of 242 rules, binary rules, that then make it so you can trade digitally scarce assets reliably for value with people on the internet that you don't know and don't trust. And then Ethereum takes this and says, you can participate, open permissionless validation of a bunch of rules that make it so we can reliably determine that you will get the computation that you're looking for. Now we're looking to bring this into labor in the real world with DAOs. So what's the set of rules that can be open and permissionlessly validated that enable you to reliably exchange a digitally scarce asset for labor and get the labor that you expected, right? Because in Ethereum, if you got compute that didn't compute the way you wanted, it wouldn't be successful, right? And right now in DAOs, we're kind of in that, you know, like we're the catalyst, like the DAO's the catalyst. It kind of takes the incentive like sunlight, and then people like spark to action and they go and build something, right? And we haven't figured out exactly how to get them to grow in the right direction. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Okay.
I can bring up, I think the more we complicate it, the tougher it's going to be for people to even want to participate in on-chain governance. And you can have the best tools, but people are alwa's the weakest link. I think it was just a couple weeks ago, a pretty big DAO burnt close to $500,000 by, it was the wrong wallet or something that they sent the funds to.
No.
Which one? Anyone know which one was that? Who knows which
I won't name names.
I won't name names, I shouldn't say.
Free speech.
But the point is that, like, you can have tools, but again, the more complicated you make it, it's going to be hard for people, and we need to make tools easier to use. Already, Web3 tools we're notorious for having complicated tools and just complicated user experiences too, and I think, yeah, we got to simplify it as much as we can to get people to want to participate, and that's a lot of responsibility. To especially be signing off on, that was a big amount, but even smaller amounts of decisions. So I feel like the user experience is a big part of it, simplifying it is a part of it. You can add a million rules, but then if you have like, what, 3 voters, like what's the point? Or who actually pay attention? Because attention is the last part. It's not just about how many people vote. How many of them have context? How much time are they spending? And are we incentivizing people to participate and put in that work? If you have 10 people that are participating in a very important decision, how many of them, like how are we even weighing how involved they are and how much they care? And not to say that should always be, you know, a measure, but I think we need to think about the other questions and sort of like the depth about it a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, like if you have just 3 voters and like people don't vote, like it doesn't matter.
I mean, the vote's part of the complexity, right? Like in Bitcoin, you're running some code, and then if you want to change the rules, basically if they want a gay marriage in Bitcoin land, it'd be like, once 90% of the people put on their rainbow hat, the other 10% are seceded from the union until they agree to follow those rules. And DAOs don't work like that. For some reason, we went back to like, let's have a vote 9 to 5 on Tuesdays when you have absolutely no context. Why did we do that? Why did we choose pure plutocracy as like our way to do it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And we are running a little bit out of time, so maybe last question, like to each of you. how you see actually the future like evolve? Like, you know, we still have like big part of the like, you know, the off-chain governance, the social consensus. We have something on chain. Like, do you think like the off-chain will eventually like be diminished kind of thing, or you know, it will be still the same, but both will be kind of evolving? Like, how you see the future? Maybe try not like next year, but maybe in like 5 years. Like, you know, a little bit further. You want to start, Mashal?
I need a few minutes to think about
Okay.
this. 5 years is a long time. You guys want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
To me, I think our biggest challenge right now is understanding the idea of single points of failure again, and that usually what we do is we delegate authority to an individual or a council. Notice that I said a council, not many councils, right? Like, it's like a single point of failure still. And these other systems that seem to work, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, had issuance that would reward. It would actually pay from the collective to reward enough people to participate in validating something that you had minimum viable decentralization in the review of, who knows, in DAOs, maybe like, was this RFP created well? You know, was this task performed well? We talk about like measuring impact. It's like grants usually mean you don't have to have impact. What about, was this built well, and then was it actually used? You know, it might be different people entirely by then. Did it match your strategic priorities? Were your priorities good priorities in the first place? You know, some sets of that. And all those things have to be reviewed by not finding somebody to delegate, but by open and permissionlessly allowing people to participate. A reputation on chain is going to be the thing that allows us to do that.
Okay. John, what about you?
So a while back, I made a bet, a long bet, if you guys ever heard of these things, that
Oh yeah.
in
Sorry.
2032, you're gonna take this? Well, you can actually choose. Decide if you want to take this bet. The bet is, by 2032, around 9 years from now, DAOs will own or manage 50% of all assets in production in the world. Definitely not taking that. Nobody wants to take this. So, I mean, effectively it's just saying 9 years from now, DAOs will run about 50% of the economy. And nobody, like, I mean, this is freaking crazy, right? This is like by far the most DAO maxi thing you can say. But certainly DAOs, as they currently are, not going to do that. The reason I made this bet is to challenge us to think, well, what would they have to look like for that to happen? How could DAOs be the actual better technology compared to standard corporation or LLC? It's actually not that hard if you understand how ancient and rickety and kind of shitty like existing corporations are. I mean, yeah, we talk about DAOs being kind of shitty. Corporations are not that great either, right? I mean, there's lots of fancy stuff out there, a lot of lawyers are getting paid lots of money. I mean, lots of lawyers being paid lots of money here too. But it's not that hard. But how can we figure out, you know, using economics, law, CS, a package of features to make us truly competitive, to make DAOs the superior option? I think that will be inevitable, whether that's 9 years from now or 30 years from now. That's a challenge for all of you.
So you're saying get rid of the lawyers?
Well, I secretly,
not
yes, I'm
legal
trying to do this. Certainly, I'm trying to pay the lawyers less.
Like, I would take the bet if I have some insight into BlackRock if they're trying to be a DAO.
They actually are, so this is public, I think, now, but they're, yeah, the BlackRock founder is actually very interested in tokenizing like a lot of different securities. And where DAOs become, you know, or naturally useful right now is where there are tokens and there are like
Data and
on-chain
DAO, we are close to 50% now.
I mean, most like law firms and like a lot of large consultancies, they already figured out the decentralization where your partner's in.
Yeah.
Right? Like the business world is DAOs.
You know, I come from a country that's not democratic, so I can't take that bet. But unfortunately. Well, it's a reality. But I think 5 years from now, I would hope that, you know, the way we're so used to using phones and apps and social media, that governance would move to something that's as easy in terms of the tech behind it as well. And I would hope that we'd be at a point where we can, and we'd have years of data and metrics to measure, where people who are part of governance and their votes can directly be connected to the results and the impact and value of it over time, not just in one ecosystem, but hopefully across the board. And so 5 years from now, I'm optimistic that because we're starting to talk about it now, then we'd be at a stage where we can understand, really evaluate, and improve, and be at a point where, you know, every decision you make or participate in and can help out, it can then easily be measured, and that improves things, and, you know, so it's a lot better going forward.
So I would summarize it. I think the future is bright. So thank you to the panelists.